After we covered two river valley civilizations, you might expect for our last section to be about another river valley civilization. This is sort of the case, but we're going to fast forward through the earliest civilizations in China because I want to get to an interesting but somewhat late period compared to the rest of the module. So we're going to talk about the Xia Dynasty in China. Ancient Asia is hard to discuss in such a small class because it's so incredibly vast a continent, and it still is today. There were many regional peculiarities and different ethnicities and languages of people settling around the continent. The Neolithic civilizations in China were numerous and scattered, but like the Mesopotamians and Harappans, they developed large and impressive cities and conducted trade with neighboring cultures. These cultures were most successful and vibrant around 3000 BCE, right around the time that the Mesopotamians and Harappans were enjoying their golden ages. We're going to do a lightning-fast preview of two of the most important river valley civilizations in China, and then we'll get to the Xia. So first up is the Yellow River Valley civilization. The Yellow River is also called the Huang River. So they're the same thing. Yellow River, Huang, same thing. The Yellow River Valley civilization began in 9500 BCE, so that's a very long time ago. But they didn't have very many cities or anything like that. This was many different cultures coming to prominence and then receding back again, in and out in this river valley area. The Yangtze River Valley settlement began as late as 6000 BCE. We have found some walled cities there. Well, there were also many different cultures who came to prominence and receded back again, just like in the Yellow River Valley. The Yangtze River Valley settlements were smaller, and there was a lot less population there than in the Yellow or Huang River. It's still a mystery to scholars how and why the many and varied rival villages and towns in the Yellow River Valley eventually came under one ruling state. Around 2070 BCE, the Xia Dynasty emerged, covering the Yellow and Yangtze River valleys and the plain between them. The area commanded by the Xia was relatively small compared to the size of later dynasties, and especially compared to China today. But the Xia embody a dramatic change in Chinese governance that lasted until the 20th century, and that's dynastic rule. Not to mention, the majority of Asia's population lived in this small area, so even though the Xia were only covering a small geographic area compared to China today, they were ruling over the largest part of the Asian population at the time. Prior to the establishment of the Xia Dynasty, Chinese villages and towns elected their leaders communally, and these leaders ruled only locally. The Erlitou people who lived in the area had resided in the plains for over 1,000 years, sharing common ethnic origins and culture, but by no means a common state. This was the norm in most of the world. At the time of the formation of the dynasty, the Erlitou had come to gradually overpower the rival peoples and cultures in the area. The Xia were not the first rulers to take the shape of a dynasty. The Egyptians had been conducting dynastic rule for 1100 years by the time of the Xia dynasty's formation. But the Egyptians commanded only the fertile lands along the Nile River. The Xia ruled an area that was 125 miles in diameter, much of it far from waterways. This was quite a feat compared to earlier states. Even those powerful kingdoms in Mesopotamia were only 1 square mile in size. The Erlitou capital was the first large-scale planned capital in Asia. Smaller towns were formed at planned intervals around the capital, as you can see here. The The Xia used these planned towns as trading posts to transfer information and resources across the large swaths of land they commanded. The Xia used two-wheeled vehicles like rickshaws or carriages pulled by either humans or animals on a complex system of roads. These roads connected their numerous towns and villages. Archaeologists have uncovered them still containing crisscrossing wheel tracks at Erlitou archaeological sites. The Xia emperors lived in palace complexes in the middle of Erlitou city. Erlitou's social structure was like a pyramid, with the emperor at the top, a few elites arranged hierarchically in the middle, and a mass of commoners at the bottom. This is significant in a time when most people lived communally in horizontally organized societies. The city itself was populated almost entirely by immigrants from the north, making it the first immigrant city in China. The most fascinating element of Xia history is that for quite some time, scholars believed they didn't exist. The Xia were written about extensively. They hold an important place in Chinese history and have, until recently, been thought to be mythological, so historians thought these were just legends. There's no question about the existence of the Erlitou as people, but some scholars have doubts about whether the Erlitou were the same people as the documented Xia Dynasty. But for most scholars, it's the only logical conclusion. There aren't any other dynasties in recorded history that were as large or as powerful as the Erlitou appear to have been. Skeptics of Xia history argue that the Zhou dynasty, which comes next and we'll learn about in Module 2, created the fiction of the Xia in order to establish the foundation for the mandate of heaven. The Zhou argued that the previous rulers of China had lost their ruling mandate, and thus the Zhou were the legitimate, divinely sanctioned rulers. The discovery of the Erlitou sites in the 1960s and 1970s convinced most scholars that the Xia really did exist, even if their history is somewhat fictionalized.